Hello, everyone. My name is Coletta White, and I'm a writer with HS Today. And I'm here with Banan, Garada, a high schooler from Urbana, Chicago. She has served on FEMA's National Youth Preparedness Council, as well as initiated and led a webinar for youth and academic professionals regarding the transition from quarantining to daily life, with speakers from the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health, and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. She also authored a storybook with illustrations for young children to raise awareness and inspire safety guidance on how these kids can better understand and stay safe during a pandemic. This storybook was even recognized by the First Lady of the United States, Melania Trump, who expressed her interest in taking a further look at the book. We at HS Today also had the pleasure of interviewing her last year about her many accomplishments. So, Banan, how are you today?
I'm doing quite well. Thank you for asking.
Of course, and how has quarantine been for you?
It's been rather interesting experience. You know, um, from the start of it, I recognized its unique effects on everyone everywhere because of the pandemic, and I was trying to find ways that I could help, even from quarantining with these national pandemic efforts.
Yes, definitely. You've been very busy. So can you tell me a little bit more about your webinar and what inspired you to kind of spearhead that?
Sure, yeah. So, frankly, it all started from, just a dinner time discussion with my family about um, thinking of ways to really get the word out about staying safe, both mentally and physically, about during the COVID times, especially when, you know, uh, stores started opening up, some restrictions started to ease in terms of, we were no longer strictly quarantining, but starting to go out and interact with people, even amidst the pandemic, and realizing that, there's a potential worry in that, when in easing these restrictions, we might fall back into, deeper pandemic, more cases in terms of the pandemic. And so recognizing that safety is paramount with these, especially with this pandemic, I thought of with my mother. My mother originally thought of this idea of creating a Safety Matters series, and our first webinar in this series was Safety Matters transitioning from quarantining to return to normalcy, in which we talked about the physical and emotional aspects of safety during coming out of quarantining, and how to abide by certain safety measures, and at the same time paying attention to our mental and emotional states.
Excellent. Um, I think that was definitely transitioning is the most difficult. And I think even now we're still all transitioning and kind of getting used to the new life where like I don't see masks and face coverings going away in the next couple of years. So it's definitely been interesting and seeing how long the US has lasted in this pandemic and how it's like, going home from college in whatever March, I totally thought I'd be back in fall or I'd be back, and I'm still at home for the foreseeable future. So it's definitely a transition for everyone. So you also authored your storybook during COVID, correct? Can you talk a little bit more about what inspired you and kind of what your storybook covers?
Sure, yeah. So my storybook is also inspired by sort of in passing idea during one of our dinner discussions of how to reach out to young children, especially because I have a young sister at home who's 4 years old, named Nadine, and since the rise of the pandemic, she stopped going to preschool. Preschool just abruptly stopped. They didn't have, school Zoom meetings. They didn't have really any way to engage with young children during this pandemic. And seeing as that was a critical, like there was a critical need to then, I realized, to help introduce and raise awareness for these young children about what was going on, because they ask a lot of questions. My young sister, first when it happened, she was like, it took her time to realize that what was going on, and can't I go to preschool? Let's go to preschool. She'd wake up, get ready, all bright and smiles. But it was really difficult having to explain to her the reason why we couldn't, especially because early in the in March and April, she would though I was trying to resources online to help answer her questions about why can't I go to preschool? Why do I have to wear this mask when I go outside? Um, Questions like that. I was trying to find a way that I could answer her questions because they are just as important as anyone else's questions and questions that need to be answered. And so recognizing that there was a lack of there was lack of focus on towards the younger children during this pandemic in terms of resources and such. I aim to think of a creative way to portray awareness of this pandemic and convey important safety measures for young children in in a way that's most engaging and pleasing to them. So it's a better way than to write a storybook and with illustrations and to be able to engage children in a way that's suitable for their age and learning about this pandemic and answering all their many questions.
And do you think that it's important that the youth get involved in pandemic efforts? Obviously not your preschool age sister, but
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. It's very important. I mean, it's very important because first of all, this pandemic affects everyone. It's it affects young and old. So being that is the case, young adults should all come to play a role to as much as they can in helping out with this pandemic and really putting what they have, putting like anything efforts of any sort to help with this pandemic is really goes a long way and really helps to create a more prepared and safe community even amidst national pandemic, but also further in the future to come, instilling a more prepared and safe generation.
and so you got involved in emergency preparedness while you were very young. And you've served on FEMA's National Youth Preparedness Board. So what inspired you to get involved when you were so young?
Sure, yeah. Well, it's from a class that I took my freshman year in 2018. Um, that really was an inspiring class. It was called the My Preparedness Initiative, and it allowed me to recognize the significance of preparedness in preventing or even diminishing emergency and disaster situations. And this class really encompassed various but CPR, we would do CPR trainings, um, disaster simulations, general learning lessons and tips to be able to look out for, natural disasters or general precautions and safety measures to take with emergency situations. This 10-week course really helped to introduce me to preparedness, and I've loved it ever since, and I've continued with it even till today, 2 years later.
That's excellent. And so what do you think, how do you think other young people should be inspired to get involved in preparedness and emergency management? What do you think the best way is?
Sure, yeah. I think it's important to recognize that the idea of preparedness already encompasses our everyday lives. Whether it comes to studying for a school test and preparing for that exam, or writing down talking points to prepare for a meeting. Um, we already do preparedness, and with that in mind, and recognizing that it could really help to you know, being aware that consciously aware that we already prepare for so many things can help our mind be prepared for disaster situations. And because disaster situations is really seeking preparedness for our physical safety and um, physical and emotional safety. And so in recognizing that and we already do it, it it really could help to further motivate and inspire people to do it, to do the exact same thing, preparing except for natural and disaster situations.
And what do you think the most important thing people should know when preparing for a disaster is? What do you think it's that one thing that they should know?
Well, see, the thing is, um, I believe that there is no one thing, because preparedness is all about making sure you account for everything. With preparing for a disaster, the goal is to think of everything you could do in advance, certain measures you can take to help to prevent or lessen the effects of the unexpected. Unexpected being the emergency and disaster situations. So really, it's no, it's and when it comes to preparedness, the one thing is taking into account everything. Writing down family plans, having boxes filled with all the supplies that you need in case of disaster, like a tornado comes and you have to be in a shelter, or there's a fire and you can only take one box with you, to have that box set and ready. So the one thing is knowing and taking into account everything.
Do you think that there's one thing that people just like always forget? Like, is there one thing that you just would never think about to prepare for? Not natural disaster wise, but I mean like remembering food, remembering a family plan, stuff like that.
Sure. That's a difficult question. I think maybe something that people often forget about. Um, so usually, it's best to prepare in emergency kits, canned foods, right? Because they last the longest, and they won't expire anytime soon or anything like that. So it's always good, and I believe it's common for people to prepare canned foods. But what I believe is not as common is for people to prepare can openers. It's something that probably, yeah, maybe it's something that not many people think of. Um, Preparing something for you to be able to open these canned foods. Otherwise, it's really difficult to open.
Yeah, definitely. That's just such a staple in the kitchen that you wouldn't even think about it if you're going somewhere else, because you're never opening cans anywhere else. Um,
Yeah.
that's really kind of funny. What do you think the biggest roadblock in having people prepare for natural disasters and emergency management is?
Sure. Yeah. For that, I would also argue that mm, it's recognizing that the idea of preparedness already encompasses everything that we do, and you know it's in realizing that, it could really help to overcome the roadblock of not knowing what to do, not knowing, maybe the roadblock is not knowing how to prepare for emergency or natural disasters, and um just not knowing where to start, or not being properly aware of it, and exposed to the area or the idea of preparing for disaster and emergency situations. So the solution would be to recognize that, consciously recognize that we already do preparedness when again, like preparing for for example, like a sporting competition. We already prepare ourselves for that, and we already do preparedness in our daily lives. So recognizing that could really help to overcome that roadblock of not knowing where to start. I mean, just think of how do you start in preparing for all the other things that you do on the daily, and having that mindset, you can be able to apply that to preparing for emergency and disaster situations.
Totally, and I think that COVID is such a great example for this, because I think people just don't think about it, or they get intimidated by all the things that they would have to prepare for. But COVID is definitely something that no one ever thought would happen. And now we're all dealing with quarantine and dealing with certain stuff, stocking up on like Lysol wipes and the toilet paper that was nowhere to be found at the start of quarantine and stuff like that. And so I think this has been a good kind of test run, especially for the American people, to figure out that we do need to be like more involved in emergency management and planning for a natural disaster, a pandemic, or something of this nature. So on FEMA's National Youth Preparedness Council, what was like the most interesting thing that you learned or did?
Sure, yeah. It's its entirety, it's a very interesting council to be a part of. I think I came to recognize through the council the aspect of financial preparedness. It's how it relates to, how our finances can relate to the aspect of being prepared. Um, having and doing that is by having, funds set in place, untouched funds that you could be able to use for at least, I think it's like 2 months and out for you to use in case of, financial hardships to occur. And take, for example, with COVID-19, it's many jobs got were lost as a result of, COVID-19. And you know um, being aware of that financial preparedness aspect in advance could have really helped to, maybe offset the following, I would say, following maybe hardships and following insecurities towards finance.
Definitely. And then last but not least, what do you plan on doing with preparedness in the future?
Sure, yeah. So I plan to get involved with the healthcare field because, preparedness is an overlooked component of healthcare. Um, it's really, healthcare is all about maintaining our physical safety, right? Ensuring and looking after our physical safety. And preparedness and being prepared, we can be able to take certain measures beforehand to prevent putting at risk our physical safety. And so the two areas are really interconnected, and I hope to really bring that out and shine light on that, and really really make obvious and true that these two areas are connected. And being in the healthcare field, I hope to really, yeah, shine light and use these two skills that I have, being prepared and being involved in the healthcare field, to really um, help people be aware of the steps they can take to not put their physical health at risk when during emergency and disaster situations.
That sounds very interesting and definitely something that I think is overlooked. And hospitals, you think that they're going to have everything, but in a natural disaster and in COVID, like not having enough gloves, not being prepared for something like that truly is very dangerous, because the hospitals really, you're right, like the physical security of our own bodies are kind of the most important. Well, it has been amazing to talk to you. I look forward to seeing what you do in healthcare and preparedness. And happy National Preparedness Month.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Bye.
Bye.